Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I know some folks are still coming over from the keynote. If you missed Grace's message earlier, a couple ways that you can ask questions, and we encourage questions throughout for the next hour. You can add them to Zoom, or you can add them to the Hoover app. The benefit of the Hoover app is that stays with us with the presentation. The Zoom chat will be gone once we close this meeting. So if you can, add it to Hoover. As the moderator, I will do my best to interject and make sure your questions get answered. If we're not able to get to your questions and they're in the Hoover app, we will respond to them after the session. So without further ado, welcome to the panel. We should know better: strategies to integrate AI into learning, teaching, and evaluation. I am Dr. Rob Moore. I will be your moderator, and I have three of my esteemed colleagues, Susan, Andre, and Chrishele. Coincidentally, these are all members of our NSF-funded Laser Institute. They were all Laser Scholars, where we were introducing and expanding learning analytics for STEM education research. So it's great to have them all with us today. So starting with Susan, if you could briefly introduce yourself, and then Andre and Chrishele, and then we'll get started.
Thanks, Rob. Hi, I'm Susan Hibbard. I'm the Senior Director for Learning Science and Psychometrics at Blueprint Prep. I work with learners across mostly medical education, health professions education, and law education. And I also have a consulting faculty line at Duke University in the School of Medicine.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andre Denham. I'm an associate professor of instructional technology at the University of Alabama, where my research focuses on leveraging the affordances of technology to transform how we teach and learn. Primarily, I focus on games, how we can use games, digital and analog, to help improve our instruction and outcomes in math and math education on the middle school level. And I'm really glad to be here today to talk about this important topic with everyone. I'll pass it on to Chrishele.
Hello, my name is Chrishele Kingdom. I am the Senior Director of the Assessments team in Detroit for Detroit Public Schools Community District. I do a lot of different things, mainly with assessments and evaluations in my full-time job, but at night, I moonlight as the document doctor. I am a contract editor for colleges and universities and work independently with students as well. Excited to be here with you all today.
All right, I'm going to kick us off with how to learn smarter with AI. And as I said in my introduction briefly, working with learners is something that I spend a lot of my time doing, and emerging data and learning analytics from psychometrics to leverage that and help learners make their dreams come true is what my children tell people that I do, but help them reach their goals, whether it's goals for a course, career goals, or any step along the way. And Rob will have you go to the next slide. So I have three ways that I'm going to share today on how we can help learners learn smarter with AI. One of the reasons why I use the word learner instead of students most of the time is in the medical world, we have students, and then once they graduate from medical school, they're still learning. They have a lot more learning to go, years of learning before they can practice with patients. But at that time, they become residents, and then they're considered like employees of the health center, academic health center. So for some people in the K through 12 world, using learner can be a little bit of a trigger. So I just wanted to clarify, I might use them interchangeably, but that's just meant to include all of the learners and the lifelong learning that we have. So the three things I'm going to talk about today: smart study planners, personalized practice, and then learning assistants or tutors, guides. So AI tutors, we've heard a lot about, I think, so far. But then sometimes it might just be a learning assistant or a guide. And next slide, please. So smart study planners, I'm going to use, you may have heard this many times already about using an analogy of a GPS or a map. Also might think of like a blueprint, but some kind of guide that's helping us know what path to take. And we think of smart study planners or any kind of study planner. This is like the start of, any good self-regulated learner is going to start with, I need to identify what it is that I need to learn or that I'm going to learn, and then start with a plan. We all remember probably having a study planner. Some of us may still use like a paper planner for what we're doing. And there's reasons why you may want to stick to that. And then also instances when it's really necessary to use something where AI helps us do that in a better way. Next slide, please. So if we think of kind of like our baseline, we can write stuff down in a planner. This may be for a course or just a specific test that you might be having learners study for. But you might say, you have 30 days to learn something, and you would take a calendar and go backwards, fill in what you're going to do, have days that you say you're not going to study, much like you might take a paper map. And you would look at the different routes on a paper map and outline the different ways that you could achieve that outcome of passing that test, getting to that destination, wherever it is you want to go. You might also have where you're going to avoid different things. If this was like a plan for a program of study, and there are times where you have choices on which course to take. You may say you want to take the course that has less papers or no papers. Just like when you're going on a trip somewhere, maybe you don't like long bridges or bridges at all, but especially bridges that go over water. Sometimes it's unavoidable. Other times you have that choice. And in this visual here, you can see the way that the Google Maps has told us to go is the blue path. And that does go over what looks like to be a longer bridge, where it could take 26 minutes to take that route, 33 if we go the lighter gray on the left, where it's going to take more minutes. However, if I don't like bridges, that probably sounds like a safe bet. Or I can go kind of straight up. That one looks like that one's going to be 29 minutes, so only 3 minutes longer, right? That doesn't sound like much of anything. So different options. And we can have a smart study planner. And at where I work at Blueprint Prep, we have that for our learners to be able to put in different criteria of things that they could make their own, or we have a system, an algorithm that does that for them and can be changed and recalibrated. And I'll talk about that on the next slide, Rob. So one of the things, though, that we can also do in a study planner when we're using AI to help us is similar to when we're using a Google Maps or any other GPS like that, where we can say, this is the route right now. I just want to see kind of what the options are, but I'm not going to leave right now. I'm going to leave, tomorrow at 5 o'clock, which is probably rush hour. And this example here, it's going from George Washington's Mount Vernon up to the Smithsonian, which is right by the White House, right by the monuments, right by where a lot of people are working, and probably leaving at 5 o'clock or around that time. So we see it went from 26 minutes to typically 40 to an hour and 10 minutes. So not only did it possibly more than double, but we're seeing changes in the route also. Now, if we're thinking for our learners, it's not necessarily the equivalent isn't just, one can take longer than the other, right? There's a lot of different things that can be changed along the way, or things that could happen. But this is also one of the ways that a smart study planner can be taking things into account that if we're just writing it down on paper, or we're sharing a study plan with learners, that's really kind of like a one size fits all. And we're seeing here, this isn't a one size fits all kind of route here. Now it's using information, it's using data based on historical records to predict or say this is what has happened in the past on this day at this time frame. This is what it usually, how long it usually takes to get from this point to this point. And you can look up Google Maps. Google tells you a lot of different ways that it calculates these things and what it takes into account. But to be able to have these different options and know if maybe I had a test today for another class and I was planning to study later today for another test, that a smart study planner may know that's not a good idea, or it's going to take me longer. I'm going to be tired, or it can take into account a lot of different things. And next slide, please. So one of the things that it can do for us is by using average learner data, so other people that have used the study planner and sharing what their outcomes were, and also kind of being able to track, this is what learners similar to you did when they were studying for this exam or when they were in this course. And then also based on the learner's own past performance, that the system may know, I'm just calling it like the system, right? The machine, I know, the learning science person at Blueprint knows that when you study, in the mornings, this is how long this usually takes you to get through this kind of learning activity. And I know that the cognitive load on this activity is higher than the cognitive load on the activities you did yesterday at this time. And being able to make those adjustments and help learners be able to balance their own time and also plan for their schedule for the future. And so we can have it be based on these three different things and more. Now, a question you might have is, well, which one would you show the learner? Well, I can tell you, medical learners in particular, they like to see them all, or they want to know at least what they all are. And I don't blame them, right? I mean, it's like when you go onto Netflix and you want to see like, all right, well, people like me liked this, right? It's giving me recommendations. I love when it knows what I might like. Or I want to know, well, what's everybody watching? What's the top 10? Even though I might look at that and say, yeah, I don't like that. One of the things that for at least like the graduate students that I have been working with for the last 7 years, during the pandemic, I was able to do like one-on-one interviews with hundreds of learners and really get to know intimately what it is they're doing, particularly physician assistant or physician associate learners. And one thing that one of the biggest takeaways was, they want to know what other people are doing. That doesn't mean they want to do exactly what they're doing, but they just want to know what they were doing, what kind of results they got, and then kind of decide, do I want to do that? Like, well, what if I did half that amount of time what they did? Then maybe I'll at least maybe get this kind of results. So those kinds of things and I think it's great to have that information if they want it, to help them make decisions on what they want to do for their learning path. Next slide, please. And so this is a way for them to take control of their time and their studying. And it may sound like, well, wait a minute, the machine was taking control of their time. Well, it's really important for us at Blueprint, but then also, for anyone that's doing something like this, sharing with the learners why we're telling them we think you should do this or you should arrange your time this way. Now, have a setting where learners can not have to see that because it could be too much cognitive load, or they don't want to know all that information. A lot of learners, they want to know what other people are doing like them, and then they want to know why you're telling them to do something this way. But a lot of them, they want to see it and be like, oh, all right, okay, I trust you, like, or that sounds good. And they don't want to know every detail, but we have it there if they want to know what it is that we're doing to help determine this. And it's also important to kind of be conservative with that of letting them know, because I'm always very cautious of telling someone to do something and follow it exactly that way when, any kind of measures we have, there's always measurement error. The other thing is that they can add into their study planner. Studying is a big part of their life or their learning planner. But we know sleep and physical activity are extremely important for learning. We know we've seen on fMRI images when people are exercising, the dendrites are growing. That should all be together, making sure, the learner is doing exercise, some kind of physical activity, that they are sleeping. But then also learners can choose to change that setting of, I don't want you to make any changes. I don't want it to recalibrate. They're also able to, maybe the next day they were supposed to do a lot of studying tomorrow, and tomorrow comes and the learner's feeling fatigued, tired, and they're like, you know what, I need to take a me day and not do that and sleep more or do whatever. And that then they don't have to go back in and like move stuff or push everything back a day. They can hit recalibrate, or they can decide how they want to make that change. But it could be maybe a learner was sick for 3 days. Then we're able to say, you know what? We can cut 2 of these things right out. Maybe not the things that were from those 3 days. Maybe there's something later on that's not as high yield of an activity. And we know it's not as high yield based on the content of it, the objectives that they're trying to achieve, all of those different things to say, let's cut this out. Something else that's really important is we find, let's say there's 5 things that we're telling a learner they should do in a day, or in a course. We have a lot of stuff we're telling them to do. Realistically, the learner's like, I only have time to do 2 of them, maybe 3. Rather than have them look at that list of 5 and pick which 2 or 3 they think they should do, letting them know, if you can only do 1 or 2, do these 2. If you can only do 3, do these 2. Forget about these other 2 for now, and save them for a day when you may have time. And so using AI to help our learners make those decisions with good judgment, because we have data to back it up, is really going to help them, because we know there's so much stuff that they're needing to do in the limited time that they have. And so we want to be able to help them make those decisions. Next slide, please. So with that, when we have study time, one of the main things that we want learners to do is practice retrieval. Rereading stuff as a study method is not studying. Rereading is very passive, and we need learners to practice retrieving and doing the things that they're going to have to do. And so you may be familiar with Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. And so this has been something that I adapted and call it the zone of proximal motivation. So the middle circle here, that current knowledge and skills, is where we've measured that this is where the learner is right now based on the activities they've done. And then this zone of proximal motivation is where we want to give them their next experiences in. We want them, it's going to stretch them, but not too far that it's in that outside zone. And the original Vygotsky zone of proximal development says that that's one that they can't do it. And so they can't do it yet. And that's where we want them to go, and they're going to go. But one of the things when we have learners do practice problems or practice activities is, if it's too hard, it's not motivating, and they need to, they'll start to feel like, you know what, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I shouldn't be a lawyer. Maybe I'm not meant to be a doctor. Or it's so easy. They do a few and they're like, I've got this. Like I can, I can move on to the next thing. And it's a false illusion of knowing. And so we want it to be in that zone. And next slide, please. I know I'm running short on time. I'm going to get through these quickly. So we personalize the practice that they get for those questions if they want us to. And we use IRT, item response theory, for the parameter estimates, because that puts the learner ability, and the ability is a term used in IRT. We're not saying this is all they're able, that's their ability and it stays. And then how difficult the questions are. We pair that up with the question metadata, the activity metadata, and we use machine learning to identify, which questions or practice they need and give it to them at the right time, that zone of proximal motivation. Next slide. And so then this last part here, like the AI tutors or the AI assistants, AI guides, and this is Blue at Blueprint. We have a new AI tutor that we use for the CARS section of the MCAT. That's like our first AI tutor that we put out, and we have more coming. The CARS section is critical analysis and reasoning, and it is considered the most difficult section by most learners that take the MCAT. And so having this helps ask questions like a tutor does if a learner activates it, because they need more when they're reviewing their questions. It can help them take a step back and break things down, or it can help them go a step further, whether they got something right or wrong, and help explain more, and also identify which strategy they used to solve the problem and backtrack on what other strategies could have been used, and really help provide kind of like that wraparound learning support to help learners anytime they're looking for that assistance. Next slide. So when we think of AI and learning, we know that efficiencies are not something, there's a time and place to be efficient when we're learning stuff. And we certainly don't want to be skipping over things that are essential building blocks for something later on. However, when we're preparing healthcare professionals with such a massive shortage that continues to get more serious in the shortages that we have, we really want to be able to have learners be efficient with their time, and there's so much information they need to learn. And so really thinking about the last few questions that I want to leave you with are, would you get in a car ride? You had to drive somewhere and it was a 40-minute drive. Would you get in the car and start driving, knowing there are different routes you could take without checking, what the traffic report was, without using the GPS of Google Maps to see what the best route was? And maybe the answer is yes. Would you do it at rush hour? So would you get in the car and do it at rush hour? And then would you also drive that car around? Maybe you're going on a long car trip. Would you do it without having the gas gauge? So you were going to have to, go by hand, keep track of your gas mileage, know when you need to stop. And then, we wouldn't want to do that, right? And then would you follow behind a car that didn't have brake lights? You're driving on the highway, you have some cars without brake lights. So these are all like little things that have been along the way, been added in. Now, some of it's safety, right? Driving behind someone without brake lights. But when we're preparing, we're in a safety situation right now, depending on where you live. And as days go on, this nursing shortage, having someone to care for you in the emergency room. We want to be efficient everywhere we can, and we want to be smart about it. And we can really transform the learner's experience and help them learn more and faster. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me stop sharing so the next presenter can swoop in. Thank you very much, Susan, for that. And there's a couple of questions.
Oh, I was going to say, for the sake of time, I was going to say you could keep sharing, but we'll go. You already stopped sharing, so that's fine. Let me get.
I can reshare. It's fine. I have it up.
Yeah, let's do that for sake of time, so that.
Okay. 1 second.
And so while Rob is pulling that up, I just want to kind of spin back a little bit. You can go to the next slide, Rob. So in our conversation, in terms of like conceptualizing what we were going to do, we all come from kind of we're all in education, slightly different backgrounds on it. But the genesis of this was that, when ChatGPT and these things came on last year or so, there was this big panic about, what's happening. And our conversation was, hey, everybody slow down. We've seen this before. And that's where we were kind of saying, hey, let's not panic. That's kind of what our title is about. And so where I am at University of Alabama and in our peers and aspirants, that was not the case. Everybody freaked out. So I'm going to give my talk kind of from the perspective of higher ed institutions. And I'll spin a little bit in terms of how everybody freaked out, but how I didn't. So I'll just summarize the freak out. The freak out was, oh my gosh, we're going to have to get rid of English 101 and 102 classes because the students are going to cheat on everything. They're going to have it write all their papers. They're going to have it pass all these gen ed classes or these classes where it's, because generative AI is just that, right? It generates content. So it's going to scrub the internet. We have to rethink what we're doing. We're not giving any more tests online. They're going to have to come in class and write everything out. And we're going to sit there and grade it, right? And it was like, everybody's like, hold on. And so my university, like many others, formed AI task force. We're in the SEC conference. That's our athletic conference, but we also do that for academic. There's an AI work group task force there. And really what it's actually settled down and where the conversation is kind of where I'm going to come from with mine is my talks, my part of the talk is that everyone's saying, wait, why don't we lean into this and figure out how can we use these tools to make teaching the job of teaching better? And so I didn't have a lot of time, so I just jotted down 6 things. I said, I'm gonna hit 6 things real quickly that I think a higher ed faculty at a school We have about almost 40,000 students at our school, right? That's operating at this scale and maybe even smaller can use AI to assist in the job of teaching. So I'm gonna talk about feedback, questions, making the abstract concrete, just in time, preparation for future learning, and novice to expert. So the first one, next slide, would be, I want to first talk about feedback. So anyone that knows that's been teaching knows that feedback is super important. This is one of the reasons why I like studying games, because when you play, one of the benefits of using games for learning is that it doesn't matter where you are in the game or how long you've been playing, you know immediately how well you are doing in a game, right? There's no guessing if you're being successful when you're playing Monopoly or not. You know how well you're doing. You don't have to guess. You don't have to wait for somebody to grade something to give it back. You have that right there in your face feedback, for lack of a better word, on what it is. And so what's really hard though, especially on the scale, depending if you have a section of 50 students or if you have a section of 300 students, right, is how do you give timely feedback, right? How do you make sure it's sensitive to the needs of students? How can you give them examples of how to do better? All those things are issues that we have in higher ed in terms of giving feedback. But it's really important because students are looking for it. They want to know how they're doing. They know how how to change. And so I think the generative AI provides us with a way to get at that feedback issue. So next slide, please. And so what it would allow us to do is several things. To one, first address the complexity of feedback. What I think happens with a lot of faculty, like depending on how much you have to grade, the nature of the assignment, your feedback might be limited, right? Because you're just trying to get something on that paper, right? Generative AI can probably assist with in terms of giving you more complex feedback. The timing of the feedback. You know, you don't want to give an assignment and then 2 weeks later give the feedback back to a student and then they've forgotten what you taught then, and you taught something new, but the class has moved on, and it's like, well, why would I even apply that feedback? Generative AI would help get at the timing of that feedback. And I think it would also assist with that, if you're thinking about it on a time series, of formative and summative feedback for students, right? Where it's not just the midterm. I know some classes here at UA, they're like 3 exams. That's the whole class, right? You take one at midterm, your final, and there might be another one. That's all the feedback you get, right? Something that does that. And then I think another thing that we struggle with on the university level is giving feedback that addresses higher order thinking, right? It's a whole lot easier to give feedback on that Bloom's taxonomy level than it is to get at that higher. But that's the whole point of what we're doing. This is higher education, right? We're trying to get at those higher levels of feedback. I think it'll also help with self-regulation for students to help them kind of mind what they're doing. And it would help with the creation of some new feedback strategies. The next thing that I want to talk about is, next slide, is common thing is for students to, you know, the most commonly used probably instructional strategy, even though we know it doesn't work, is lecture, right? And the whole point of the lecture in a higher ed situation would be, I'm going to impart this information to a student, and the student's got to capture it all and remember it all, just in case they have to use it somewhere else. And they've got to remember when to use, you know, what you might have said at minute 8:13 of a lecture about something that shows up later on a test. And this is just my example of a student trying to work on an assignment and trying to remember what it is that you said that was so key. Next slide, please. So what I think generative AI provides us is the ability to provide for students more just-in-time learning. And so Susan talked about it a little bit too. Here, I actually am an associate dean of the graduate school. We just employed a chat bot because we realized we were answering all these same questions all the time. And so we put a chat bot on our website that kind of gleans our whole website. And then the way it works is it provides answers to the point where it can't provide an answer. And then it actually sends an email with that question to a human, and we answer that. But it answers a lot of the frequently asked questions. It's something that, for the professional schools, like those in medical school, dental school, it's a way you can maybe reimagine some of your training as well. It's a great for informal learning. I think the number one just-in-time learning platform that we have is YouTube. If you want to know how to do something, what do? You Google it and you go to YouTube and you go watch that video. I fixed my washing machine that way. I fixed so many things in my house because of YouTube, right? How can we create that for our classes? I think that would help solve a lot of problems. We can do some problem-based learning as well. This would happen real time, right? Because then for students, they're not having to guess. They can ask those questions and get those answered. They'll be personalized and they'll be learner-driven as well. These are some of the things that Susan brought up. Next slide for me. So I'm a former middle school math teacher. And the number one question I would get all the time, and I hope folks aren't having PTSD flashbacks seeing this image, was when am I ever going to use this in real life? And one of the examples that came up was when we were doing the quadratic equation. And my students were like, why are we solving for X? Like, what is the point of this? And I was like, I'm done. I was like, I'm tired of this. So the next day we went to the gym and we started shooting hoops. And I was like, if I gave you this, like, where is this going to go? Like, how high should we? We're having these questions. And what I ended up saying was, how you can find this? By using the quadratic equation, the solution for a quadratic equation. That's why the curve looks like that. And my student said, oh, and I was teaching in Huntsville, Alabama, which is called Rocket City, because the rocket that they built, the Saturn rocket that took us to the moon, was built in Huntsville, Alabama. There's a whole Space and Missile Defense Command there. It's all rockets. I was able to contextualize and say, yeah, that's why they need to know how to do these things. They need to know where this rocket's going to go, right? How high it's going to go, where it's going to land, things like that. So next slide. What I also believe is that generative AI can help make the abstract concrete. There are a lot of things that our students struggle with because they are just so abstract in the nature that we solve it. And my colleagues here are brilliant at UA. They're great content experts. That does not mean that they have good pedagogical knowledge and are able to translate what they know tacitly and make it explicit to a student. So this is a way I think generative AI can help, is creating better visualizations that help make the abstract concrete, help instructors create analogies and metaphors. When I was that math teacher, when I really hit my stride was when I was able to explain something 5 different ways. It's the same thing. I showed it to everybody. I would explain it one way, a good 20% of the class would get it. I'd have to explain another way for the next 20, so on and so forth, was in order to get everybody to do it. And another thing that'd be great is ELI 5. This is a Reddit subreddit called Explain to Me Like I'm 5. I think this would be great use for generative AI to help students understand and also create animations and also generate for faculty some real world examples of some of the abstract things that we're doing. Next slide. One of the main things that we do in education is we teach for transfer. So basically you take Algebra 1 and we're hoping that everything you learn in Algebra 1 is going to transfer so you can do Algebra 2, so you can do Algebra 3. And so if we go to the next slide, there's a scholar, Bransford and Schwartz. Bransford was at Vanderbilt. I think Schwartz is at Stanford now. He's the dean there. They came up with this theory called preparation for future learning. And it was to say that, we struggle with the transfer because we don't prepare our students to be adaptive in their learning and their thinking later on. So I think this is a theoretical framework I use a lot in my work. And so I think generative AI would help a lot with that transfer problem by helping create new resource generation, create worked examples. Worked examples are great. Students like that, to be able to see, oh, okay, this is what I'm trying to do. Guide students through the learning process and also increase motivation. Next, one of the things that as my pet peeve, and I hope our guests don't do this here, is when you do a whole spiel, you do a presentation, you go, all right, does anybody have any questions? And it's crickets. What I realize is that students don't know how to ask questions, right? And also faculty, we don't know how to ask good questions as well that would actually elicit a response from our students. So next slide. I think AI would be helpful for faculties in terms of developing this discussion questions and prompts that will elicit conversation with the classroom. It also will help if you can do that in terms of metacognition, students developing better metacognition. We've had intelligent tutoring systems for a long time. I think this is generative AI is something that we can use to even refine that. And then using the data, mining the data that we get from these tutoring systems and from these questions, the chatbots that we talked about earlier, we could get some great insights from there, especially in terms of determining help-seeking behaviors of students, like who's seeking help, when, and so on and so forth. All right, my last slide, and I'm done. Then I'll pass to Chrishele, is talking about how do we know, this is kind of my assessment thing. We're trying to get students to go from novice to expert, right? And how do we know that, right? And how can we craft that? So on my next slide, I think there's some ways that generative AI can help go from that, is helping with learning, creating learning trajectories for students. So helping to get some theoretical learning trajectories for teachers to understand, to work on more of adaptive expertise with students, helping instructors learn how to fade. So if you're scaffolding an assignment, how do you fade that out so that students can do that? Another great one I think would explain to me like I'm five would be these three together. Helping students helping evaluate students' pre-concepts, their conceptual understanding, and their misconceptions, right? So have students, and this is kind of all lumped together. So the students asking a question or you give them a prompt, have generative AI give them feedback where it can know if they have a misconception about something and say, hey, no, that's actually not how that works. Here's what it actually really is. And then just overall helping teachers make things that are tacit more explicit for students. So these are just some things, and I don't have a lot of time to get into it. I probably could have done an hour on each of them that I just wanted to say, coming from a higher ed faculty member, I think generative AI we could teach better with it. So I'll pass it over to Chrishele at this point. You're muted.
All right, I am muted. Thank you. All right, so this was like the perfect segue into what I prepared to share with you all today. It's all about, how we can evaluate smarter with AI. And I think when I entered into this space and really started to think about how I wanted to develop this part of the presentation, I was more focused on the evaluation of student learning, right? But then also pulling up and reflecting on my work as an editor, I realized that I could actually use this to evaluate patterns among student performance as well. So I am primarily in the K-12 space where data literacy is often a challenge. Often there's a misconception that this is innate to teachers when they actually do need training and scaffolding and opportunities to practice with how to analyze and respond to student data. So when I look at how we can use our AI to evaluate, student work and teaching, I am looking at it from an analysis standpoint. So using AI to analyze student work, to compare trends among student work, to suggest refinements, and then provide relevant examples or resources for improving student work. So every time I bring this up, people are like, but how? Andre made a good point about faculty not always knowing how to ask the right questions. And I chuckled because when it comes to using AI in this way, you really do have to practice asking the right question or crafting the right prompt. And so I wanted to focus more on the practical and where it can meet the theoretical. So for me, I created basically a chatbot in ChatGPT named Editor. So I have a student prompt and I also have a faculty prompt. So I'm going to go through both of these relatively quickly, but hopefully you'll be able to get the slides and actually go through these a little more slowly on your end. So basically, I created an editor, told it what its beliefs were, and then outlined the task. So an introduction summarizing the role and their expertise, an overview of the writing task, and then I wanted it to create a specialized list of commands with those listed in bold. The first part of the prompt, I wanted to gauge our students to be able to gauge or report their comfort level with grammar and mechanics. Again, I'm an editor by night, so I chose a real world example that I actually use with my student clients. And so basically, if they were comfortable with editing, then editor could skip the introduction to grammar and mechanics. But if they were uncomfortable or weren't quite sure of what grammar and mechanics actually entailed, then it would provide an outline, if you will. Then for the second part of the prompt, it was supposed to ask for information around the writing prompt or the topic, and then wanted to know, like, hey, is this a draft or is this a final product? And if it was a draft, it was supposed to prompt the user to provide an overview of kind of what they were uncertain about in their writing to get some of that targeted feedback and support that Andre referenced in his section of the presentation. And then if it was a final product, it was to prompt them to provide a sample of their writing for review. So once the student provides all of that, there are these specialized commands. So I wanted editor to be able to suggest, improve, explain, provide a summary, and then refresh. And so basically, when it comes to suggesting, it was more or less about identifying those writing best practices. Like, this was actionable feedback. You need to use shorter, more concise sentences, something that they could really kind of hold to. If they were suggesting improvements, it was because there was a critical examination of the user's the user's writing, and then highlighting areas where grammar and mechanics was kind of, we could do a little bit better here. The key term or the special command of being able to explain. So if editor said, hey, there's a lot of passive voice here, and the user was not sure about what passive voice entails or how to correct it, like the user could say, can you explain how to transform passive voice into active voice using an example from my writing sample? And then the chatbot would respond in kind. So I have a few examples of just like the output. So editor introduces itself, tells like, hey, this is what we're going to do. I want to know how comfortable you are. I want to know what you're writing about. And then it goes into the initial prompts. So that's what this is a screenshot of on the screen. Then if we go to the next one, you'll see that the user, who is me, is, I said, no, I'm not comfortable with grammar and mechanics. This is actually ChatGPT-4, for those of you who are wondering in the chat. But yeah, so then I said, no, I'm not comfortable with grammar and mechanics. And then the bot basically is like, hey, okay, well, let's do an overview of all of the things that grammar and mechanics typically entails in graduate level writing. And so it gives it kind of this, gives the user an overview. And then from there, requests the writing topic. So you can go forward. So I'm providing, hey, I'm writing about special education teachers' perception of their readiness to teach students with disabilities, and this is a final product. So since it's a final product, the chatbot responds, okay, let me have the writing sample, and then I will, examine it, suggest improvements and suggestions. So this is an actual like snippet from a paper from way back when in my undergrad program. And I provided 2 paragraphs because I did not want to overwhelm or use up all of my tokens with ChatGPT-4. So it's just a couple of paragraphs that I asked to analyze for the purpose of this presentation. And then you'll see that there is an output of specialized commands. So all of these improvements is actually pulling sentences from the writing sample that I've provided and then making those suggestions based on the improvements that it sees after critically examining these, the writing sample. We can go for it. All right, so for students, that provided like real-time actual support. I do this a lot with my doctoral students who are trying to do their best writing. But on the faculty side, I'm starting to play around more with these chatbots and being able to analyze writing across different students to figure out what the common errors are in students' approaches to their writing, right? And so I will say I use ChatGPT for this, but I do prefer Claude because, again, I can submit greater, like larger bodies of text in Claude than I can in ChatGPT. But for the sake of, alignment, I went ahead and did this in ChatGPT. So again, same concept. The faculty prompt is, hey, I want to know how many writing samples you're going to be submitting. If it's 1, they're to prompt them for, additional writing samples. If it's greater than 2, then give a comprehensive introduction of the common errors that we typically see in graduate level writing. Again, writing is my choice here because we don't typically teach it well, and we don't have space to teach it in a lot of our higher education curriculums, our curricula. So we have to make sure that we can get students access to the resources that they need. So then the prompt is to provide the sample itself, all of the samples separated by sample 1, sample 2, and so on. From there, we still have this specialized commands, but the first 3 have changed. So now I want the chatbot to analyze, so offer actionable feedback for each individual sample, compare the samples one against each other and identify common errors, and then suggest what those common errors are in the output. And then explain, summary, and refresh are still the same. So here was the output for the analysis of sample 1 and sample 2. And then when it came time for the chatbot to suggest and or explain, then there were the concrete suggestions and then an explanation of why those suggestions were, what they were supposed to look like and sound like in the paper. And so I don't know why this part got cut off, but I did want to say that ChatGPT 4 does have a token limit. So it's 8,000 tokens. You want to make sure that you can, I skipped a slide here. So again, let me pop back here. Faculty, the faculty output with the summarization is more so about, hey, let me hear what each individual student needs to work on. And then when we get to the compare function, it does tell the faculty member or me, who is the user, kind of what the common areas are. And then I did ask it, did not include it here, but asked the chatbot to provide resources that would speak to the common errors that were present in both student submissions. So again, it's a way to kind of reduce the cognitive load of trying to figure out how to give each student quality feedback, but then also being able to lock into grammar and mechanics rules ourselves. I edit for a lot of faculty, so it's not something that all of us are experts in. And so leveraging ChatGPT and other AI platforms in this way can really go a long way in helping us evaluate student learning, but also putting students in that seat of ownership and autonomy where they can evaluate their own learning before it ever comes to us. So yeah, I think interested to see if there are any questions.
Yes, there have been several questions. Thank you so much to all of the presenters. We have about 5 or 6 minutes. So I want to address some of the questions. First, there was a comment in the chat from Derek about curious to see how an AI tool analyzes the data versus how I analyze it. So one of the challenges with AI is that they have what's considered white box and black box AI, right? So a lot of times what's happening when we're doing these algorithms, it ends up being essentially black box, right? Like we put some information in and the AI spits out a response. We don't necessarily always understand what the mechanics were and what it was doing. So that's part of that deep learning that's happening, right? So one of the things that you can do is a concept called explainable AI. And basically what explainable AI does is it runs on top of one of these deep learning models. And what it's going to do is going to explain how you're making those decisions. So Chrishele kind of showed a little bit of an example of explainable AI, because on that example with the student prompt, it listed what the prompt, what the student's message, what a student had written, and then it gave the suggestion right underneath it, right? So you can kind of start to see where it was, as opposed to simply aggregating everything and saying your sentences are repetitive, right? It says, here's an example. So it's not exactly explainable AI, but that's one thing that you may want to consider doing. So Derek, as you're looking and building your system, you may want to look in a way to do the explainable AI, because that does two things. One, it makes it more transparent the decisions that AI is making, but two, it also helps you refine the model yourself, right? Because then you can do some QA on it and see and make sure it's pulling out the right things and keying in on the right keywords. Susan, you had a question, and the question was, could you unpack a little bit more about how AI should explain the reasons for suggestions so that learners can take control? I think we kind of addressed that with the transparency and explainable AI. Are you picturing AI listing what factors are considered for suggestions, or something more readable or Google Map-like AI giving a suggestion respectively for performance, time efficient, or some other learning goals priorities? That was a lot.
Yeah, what was the very beginning part of that? Are we considering?
The first part is that how AI should explain reasons for suggestions, but we actually just addressed that with Derek. We can use explainable AI that will address that. So the second part of the question is I think what the idea is, how does this, you were talking about the roadmap, right? And people, it told you what to do, right? But it didn't tell you how it got to that path, right? It didn't say, it's like with the map, it said, hey, if you avoid the bridge, it does this. So within Blueprint, are you giving some feedback of what factors are being used that determine that path, so they could kind of modify the path a little bit, even more granularly than what we had with the GPS?
Yeah, so things like letting learners know, your performance in these two topic areas is lower than your performance in these 5 areas, and these are high yield topics. So explaining why we would recommend for them to practice on certain topics versus others, and letting them know, just always kind of like letting them know why are we recommending this over that? Because it's easy to recognize a learner. Many of the learners that are wanting to take the MCAT or are going to take the MCAT, they're high performers, right? So they know what they want, and they know, here's the blueprint. This is what I want to do. So why are you telling me that, why should I do that? I just want to do it this way. So there's a lot of alterations happening. We also know there are many learners who, they want to do something because that's what they like. We stay away from pain points if we can, but it's like, but you should do this. You haven't practiced this in a while. So, and it's a high yield area. This is why we're doing it. And we try to also, we do also emphasize, spaced repetition, and like letting them know, this is why we want you to do this now. We will revisit this later, and kind of bringing in that learning science component, telling them and being explicit so they recognize that, because at some point they're going to leave us, and we want them to be remembering those things and hopefully incorporate it into what they do after they leave us.
Andre, a question for you. How can AI be used in education to enhance durable skills?
Durable skills. That's a new one, but I think one thing that I really wanted to dive deep into and to get at is the self-regulation part of it, like how creating some AI tools to develop those self-regulation skills. I think that's the biggest thing that we see here, especially that transition from high school to that first year. I tell students all the time, the bell doesn't ring in college, right? There's no one telling you to get up and go to class, right? And then the thinking and the way that the material is presented is different. Even so, when you go to graduate level, when you go master's, doctoral. So I think I can envision some creating tools that will help students develop those durable skills, or those metacognition skills that help support self-regulation. With that, though, I think the tricky part is people would have to use it, right? It's kind of that is kind of thing. Like, how do you keep it help remain motivating? This is something I was thinking about even in my doctoral program was, layering an intelligent tutoring system within a digital game that's made for learning, right? So you could maybe see gamifying this some way so that folks are, remaining engaged with some tool that's helping them develop the durable skills. I think I hope that's the answer you want. But that's just off the top of the head, that's what I think could be used. AI could be used for.
Well, as we wrap up, 2 quick comments. First comment is, I don't know how old everyone is that's attending this, but for those of you who are of a certain age, you may remember when we had the TI-83 calculators that came out. And everyone freaked out about the TI-83 calculator and thought that every student was going to be cheating. They're never going to learn math. It's going to be a crisis. We've got to ban the calculators. We got to do all this stuff. Very similar comments they're having with ChatGPT right now. And at a certain point, and this is the purpose of us doing this panel, is the educators said, whoa, let's take a breath. Let's take a beat. And let's figure out a way to integrate the TI-83 calculator into the curriculum and turn it from a threat to education to a complement to education. And then what ended up happening is there was a pedagogical shift, and teachers understood and how to teach students how to use it as a tool to assist them and complement, and was no longer seen. So one of the simple things was show your work, right? So when they required us to show our work, it meant that we couldn't just use the calculator to spit out answers, right? So with ChatGPT, the comparable thing is to require drafts from students, right? Because if you require drafts and writing samples throughout instead of just giving a 20-page paper in the semester, but you say, hey, you've got to show me your outline. Hey, you got to show me your anti-bibliography. Hey, you've got to give me a 5-page draft. At a certain point, it kind of cuts down on some of the triggers, motivations to go to ChatGPT to kind of bail you out, right? And I think Chrishele did a fantastic job. There's actually several questions for you, Chrishele, that sounds like you need to do a whole workshop, because how you use ChatGPT is exactly how Andre, when he was teaching middle school math, thought about how to use the TI-83 calculator, right? It's like, how do I use this as a tool and leverage the power within ChatGPT to support the students, but not do the work for them, but kind of guide them along the learning process. So we are running out of time with that. I want to thank the panelists again. You did an amazing job. So please, I know we couldn't answer all the questions, but continue to add your questions and comments into the Whova app. We will be uploading the slides. Chrishele has a couple more slides that we had to hide because we were tight on time. So that will get uploaded within the next week or so. But we have access to Whova for the next month. So please add your questions, and the panelists will periodically check on that, and we will do that. So again, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your evening or morning, depending on where you are in the world.